Are you busy with work, got studies to attend to, or have you just not had the time to follow FPL preseason? My name is Benji, and today is your lucky day because I'm going to be sharing with you my ultimate preseason cheat sheet, which includes 1. A preseason league table so you can visually judge how teams have fared, 2. In-depth tracking data for all FPL premiums in preseason so you can easily compare each one, and 3. The top preseason performers in the defender, midfielder, and forward positions with all of their minutes, all of their GA, and all of my analysis. Thinking cap activated. The first thing I'm going to say is please don't use this preseason cheat sheet as your only source for your game week 1 decision making. Usually lineups for teams during preseason are much weaker than what we're expecting in game week 1, and that's particularly true this summer with all of the international competitions flying around, the Euros, Copa America and stuff. And I just really believe there's actually a lot of value in what we've seen this season. And so what you're looking at here is the preseason league table based off every team's final 4 preseason games, and it's only the last 4 games, guys, the last 4. And I've done this because usually the later games in preseason feature tougher opposition and more first team players receive minutes. So by only using the last 4 games, we get the most recent numerical statistics with the highest level of credibility possible. I see many content creators using last season's team and player data in their FPL preseason content, which can be relevant, but it is technically outdated and it's potentially also dangerous to be basing your picks just based off the data from last season because everything's about to change, right? We've got like 4 or 5 new managers in the league for Game Week 1, and we've obviously got the 3 newly promoted teams as well. So just be cautious in using last season's data to dictate your decisions. But in this table, we've got 4 zones, okay? We've got the red zone, green zone, blue zone, and the gray zone, and they just basically represent the teams split into patches of 5. Let's move bottom to top, shall we? So starting in the red zone with Leicester City, they sit rock bottom in the table, which to me is not a big surprise at all. It's really not a shock to my system because Maresca snagged, Dewsbury Hall snagged, Vardy injured, Daka injured. They've lost their manager who actually brought them up last season, and they lost their number 10 who was top of Leicester's goal involvements last season. They brought in Steve Cooper, who I wouldn't say is a bad coach, but I do think he's in serious trouble because only 1 win and 3 losses in this preseason in the last 4, 2 goals scored and 8 goals conceded for a goal difference of -6, right, in their last 4. I don't know about you guys, but no chance I'm even touching Winks, Fies, Vestergaard, Hermansen. I'm taking 0 Leicester players into Game Week 1, and that's for sure. With both of their strikers out, this may actually push some people towards Steffi Mavadidi at 5.5 million in the midfield, who he's probably going to be on Leicester penalties with both strikers out. But in their last 4 games, they've averaged a mere 0.5 goals scored per match, which is tied 20th worst with Southampton. Aston Villa also sit in the red zone. They started quite well in preseason, but it's turned from a promising start to quite a dreadful end to preseason, really. 1 win and 3 losses, only 0.8 goals scored per game in preseason, 3 goals scored and 6 conceded in their last 4 games. As well as this, absolutely 0 signs of Ollie Watkins and Emiliano Martinez. Now, look, this puts major doubts in my head about Villa, who they will have a hectic fixture schedule with Champions League football coming into Villa, and it just makes me hesitate that teeny bit with like Morgan Rogers, who we'll discuss later on in the video, but I'm choosing to err on the side of caution with Villa. 1 defender does seem reasonable based on the Game Week 3 fixtures and beyond, but I definitely hold off on that second player, which is probably a Villa attacker, until later. And Brentford, 3 draws and 1 loss in the final 4 fixtures. I will say one thing that I've noticed with Brentford is that actually their attack is doing very well. They've scored in every preseason game, and you can see the attacking potential is not really the issue with Brentford. 7 goals in 4 games, however, the 9 goals conceded, that's the problem. 9 goals in 4 games, not good at all. And because, look, I've seen so many Fleckens in drafts, and I think he's a solid pick, but bro, he's been so poor in preseason. He's been the reason for a couple goals. He had a howler against Wolfsburg, and I wouldn't be surprised if Brentford pick up 0 clean sheets in the first 5 games, which is a trend we actually saw at the start of last season as well. West Ham and Everton are the final teams in the bottom 5. West Ham's final preseason game saw them draw 2-2 with Celta Vigo. Bowen and Paqueta were back and they did look a lot better, but similar to Brentford, I don't think West Ham will have a problem scoring goals. The problems are going to come from the defense, and I do think they're going to concede quite a lot of goals this season, which is something when we look at the data. West Ham in their last 4 conceded 2 goals per game in this preseason table. Only 2 other teams had a worse average than West Ham, so the very early numbers are also suggesting that as well. As for Everton, they haven't been horrid in preseason, but I've seen no signs of real great improvement, only small signs for regression in Dyche's side. It's radio silence on Branthwaite as well in Merseyside. He hasn't been in any of Everton's preseason games, and O'Brien was partnering up with Tarkowski in Everton's final preseason game, which was a 1-1 draw with Roma. Look, we know what we're going to expect with Everton, right? You're going to get some clean sheets and you're going to get not many goals. So I think an Everton defender is fine for game week 1. Now let's move into the grey zone. There's a lot of surprises here. Let's start with Chelsea and Manchester United. As a United fan, I watched us closely through preseason and we weren't particularly impressive, and that's what the data says too, right? Just quite average really. Only 5 goals scored and 4 conceded. 1 win, 1 draw, 2 losses. It's not horrific, but it's not great, is it? This is where I am currently with United. If De Ligt and Mazraoui come in and start versus Fulham on Friday, which is a massive if, by the way, I'd probably own, in that case, Lissandro Martinez with Shaw out for game week 1, as Martinez is probably playing left back as he did in the Community Shield. He actually got a lovely assist for Bruno's offside goal, and I think there's some upside there, but I'd overall be more comfortable with investing in Man United's defense, but even then it's still risky, right? It's still early to say that I'm going to go out there and I'm going to pick a United defender because De Ligt and Mazraoui are starting. They haven't even had more than a week with the team, so I still think there's a lot of risk there and it's probably just too early to say. My advice, keep your United stakes to a maximum 1 player for game week 1, and that player should probably be an attacker. Now on Chelsea. Chelsea are a tough read because of the new coach, a ton of new players, and we're all wondering, are they going to be that team? In their last 4, they won 1, drew 1, and lost 2 games. 7 goals scored and 7 against. It's similar to United, basically very average, but my gut is just telling me that one of these 2 teams will outperform and surprise all of us early on in the season. One of them will finish top 4. At least that's the way I'm thinking. One will, and just between you and me, it's probably Chelsea. The squad is just so good, and having Lavia fit will prove to be massive for Chelsea. I think great attackers, and for me, it's not about preseason for Chelsea. It's not about the first couple game weeks either. It's the fact that at some point, I do expect Maresca to get that squad to click, and when they do, people won't really expect it, which makes them a very interesting pickup in game week 1. Because if you did pick up Chelsea for that City game and they do beat City, the amount of momentum they're going to get from that result, I mean, I can already see Salah to Palmer. But if Chelsea beat City in game week 1 you own Palmer, I'm sure you're going to be sitting very pretty this season because I'm sure everyone's going to move to him. Speaking about City, let's move to City. So Man City, interesting team for investment. I think 1 win, 2 draws, 7 goals conceded, 0 clean sheets, and that's the thing that's really stuck out for me with City in preseason. It's their defense and the fact it's looked particularly fragile, and that could be down to the fact they didn't have a lot of their senior defenders back on club duty until a bit later. However, it's the midfield that's a big worry for me because if you're looking at defensive investment, you want Rodri starting, and I don't think he's going to be starting. I don't think he's going to be featuring at all for Man City until that West Ham game in game week 3. And you could, if he doesn't play Ipswich Town in game week 2, then where's the real value in that? Because that's the good fixture for your defender, right? You want the clean sheet. Not saying Ipswich are going to score, but I do think that City are significantly worse without Rodri in the team. But yes, he'll be missing, and I don't think Pep's gonna rush him back for Ipswich Town at the Etihad. Very easy fixture. But if you just think about last season, City's poor run of form, their worst run of form came when Rodri was not available for selection. So I do think this will weaken City's control in the games that Rodri does miss, and it's also just turned me off from Man City defenders and defensive investment at the start of the season. The attack, though, I think definitely go for it. City are always going to score goals, and that's how it's always been. Moving swiftly on to Southampton, who won one game, drew two, and lost one. They actually kept two clean sheets in pre-season, but how relevant are these clean sheets? This is another trappy one, I feel. I wouldn't really take too much out of Southampton's summer, apart from the fact they've recruited quite well, which is something I've been preaching in my videos. New left back Sugawara, who we'll actually be taking a look at later in this video, but they've also gone and bought Harwood Bellis, who helped them earn promotion last season. They bought him from City, I think, for around 20 million, and they also picked up Ben Burrett and Diaz from Sheffield, which I think is a very shrewd signing. They've looked solid, and I don't fancy, honestly, any of the other promoted teams apart from them, so I like it. Just don't go too crazy in terms of investment, just based off their preseason. I know they look okay, but don't go too crazy. I think if you can sit on, if you're going Armstrong, then that's fine. Maybe Howard Bellis, that's fine, but nothing in the midfield, that's for sure. I don't think they're going to offer any value there. Final team in the gray zone is Spurs. Now, Spurs are interesting. 2 wins, 2 losses in their 4 most recent preseason games. Exactly 10 goals scored, exactly 10 goals conceded. That's Spurs, right? It's exactly like Spurs. Lots of goals at both ends, and I do think this is a trend that's going to continue. A lot of people are very hot on Spurs this season, but I'm not really quite sure why, because I don't think they've solved their defensive issues at all. They're going to score a lot of goals, so, Son, Paro, Solanke, he will do well, but defensively, I mean, I look at the set pieces in preseason, and they're conceding so much. In against Bayern, 2 of their goals came from set piece plays. So I'm just thinking it's probably an avoid for me. Into the blue zone. Now, this is a very trappy feeling zone. All of these teams, you'd argue, will finish bottom 10 this season, so why are they so high up? Well, I think in particular, Ipswich and Forest have chosen easier preseason schedules in comparison to other clubs, which inflates their performance in this table, and this is why it's good to make decisions based on multiple resources. Sorry. Be careful in investing in these blue zone teams because they could be traps. So that's just a little disclaimer. Now, if you asked me to rank all of these teams for investment in the first 5, my ranking would probably be Fulham first, then Bournemouth or Forest. I think Forest second, Bournemouth third, then Ipswich, then Wolves. And that's because Fulham have only played 3 preseason games. Well, actually, it's 4 games, but their first game, they beat Watford 6-1 behind closed doors. So I decided to exclude that from the table because I didn't want inflated data where players are just stat padding, basically. But genuinely, Fulham are looking very solid this season. I'm hearing Sasa Lukic is more than capable of taking up that CDM position from Paulinho, who's gone to Bayern. They've gone and got Emile Smith-Rowe from Fulham, who I think is a very shrewd signing, and yeah, I like Fulham. I like Fulham as a package. I like the defense. Their attack kept some clean sheets in preseason, so it's a very nice place. Forest in the first 5, just because of their opening fixtures, I put them second. And look, Forest were okay in preseason. 2 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss in their last 4. Look, I think it's fine to own a Forest attacker and perhaps even a defender if you're thinking, hey, there might be a clean sheet in that opening 3. But look, Forest, they did keep a clean sheet, and so perhaps there could be something there. But honestly, all of these teams in this light blue zone, they're very tricky to predict because all of them have had weird preseason fixtures. Like, some of them are tough, some of them are weaker. So compared to the rest of the teams, I just think that make sure you take this data with a pinch of salt because I think that it's slightly inflated. Onto Bournemouth. Bournemouth have a tricky fixture schedule, and they've just sold Talisman Dom Solanke to Spurs. I think definitely they will regress in terms of how well they did last season. Now, I'll just touch on Wolves, who nobody's really looking at because of their opening fixtures and because they're shocking. And I don't recommend looking at Wolves, honestly. A hard avoid for me. They've lost Neto and Kilman, 2 key players for them last season. It's just an obvious stay away. It's an obvious stay away at the moment. Finally, the top 5 teams in preseason, and first place in the table is Brighton. Fabian Herzella, who is Brighton's new manager, actually produced very impressive defensive numbers at his former club St. Pauli, and particularly his data from attacking set pieces is a very significant point to note because, well, it's definitely well worth considering Lewis Dunk at 4.5 and Barco at 4.0. And I think even if Kadioglu signs, Barco could still start game weeks 4 and perhaps game weeks 5, with Estupinian predicted to be back September best case, and Kadioglu can also play right back. He can play in the midfield. He can play a couple different positions, and I don't think left back is Brighton's weakest position at the moment. Let's talk about Brighton's preseason record, which does stand out to me, and I'm sure it stands out to you. 4 wins from 4. However, I do question the strength of their preseason fixtures, where they faced Kashima, Tokyo Verdy, QPR, Villarreal, and if we compare that to Arsenal, who played Bournemouth, Man United, Liverpool, Leverkusen, and Lyon, Arsenal's preseason schedule was clearly tougher than Brighton's, and Arsenal are very high in my thoughts. But what this shows us is the significance of processing this cheat sheet with a pinch of salt. Let's say you looked at it like this. You've just seen Brighton's preseason stats, and you said to yourself, oh wow, 4 from 4 wins. They scored 14 goals in 4 matches and they averaged 0.8 goals conceded per game, and they were the best team in preseason. This means I should pick up João Pedro, Dunk, and Barco for game week 1, right? No. That's not what we take out of this. What we take out of this is actually, oh, okay, Brighton have played well in preseason, and I think that justifies one Brighton player in my Game Week 1 team because they're scoring a lot of goals and their defensive numbers are solid. 2 could be too much to invest in Brighton because I learned on Thinking Cap that in Brighton's 4 preseason games, the best team they played was Villarreal, who finished 8th in La Liga last season. Their data could be inflated, which means I should be cautious in how many Brighton players I actually own. Now that is what we're actually learning from this. Not that Brighton's the best team for investment, but that they've shown promising signs, which means yes, have some Brighton, but be careful in how much. Next is Crystal Palace, who have had an excellent preseason as a whole, unbeaten in their last 4, but they did draw their final game 1-1 against Nantes. If you want to take a look at each team's form tracker, I actually included the entire cheat sheet in the video description and some extra useful statistics, so definitely check it out after this video. And back to Palace, I actually think they've had a very balanced fixture schedule, 2 games versus Premier League opposition, and I like Glasner's back 3 setup and how that's impacted Eze's positioning on the field, where he's basically given more license to drift out wide, move centrally, basically more responsibility, more freedom to express himself and be creative. Remember that Eze was under Hodgson last season. Glasner, he's a completely different bowl of fish. I've seen a ton of drafts on Twitter though with double Palace defense, and I would reconsider that if I did have that in my draft. 6 goals conceded in their last 4 games in preseason and 0 clean sheets in all of their games in preseason. I'm not convinced entirely on their defense, but let's see what happens, right? 2 Palace seems more than acceptable based on this. If you want a defender and a midfielder, up to you. Liverpool ranked 3rd in the table, undefeated in 4. Liverpool's last 2 preseason games were against Sevilla and Las Palmas. The Sevilla game was basically the first team, and the Las Palmas game was essentially a B team. Now, why have I included Liverpool's draw if it's their B team? Well, that game featured Elliott, Robertson, Nunez, Konate, and Gakpo, who did start at left wing, but the fact is they didn't lose and they actually drew and kept a clean sheet, which highlights the strength of Liverpool's squad coming into next season. In the Sevilla game, Diogo Jota, who we'll discuss specifically later on in the video, he scored an absolute banger and Trent assisted him as well, so I'm quite sure we've all added them to our individual watch list, but if you haven't, I'd recommend doing that. Liverpool's preseason has been against some very good teams. Obviously, the other 2 games I've mentioned, plus Real Betis, Man United, and Arsenal, because Slots is the new coach, I still would usually recommend some hesitance here, but I just think based off preseason as a whole, 2 Liverpool players for Game Week 1 seems like a good place to be. The fixtures are good, and if you're even feeling spicy, you could consider 3, but for me that's just too much. Next is Newcastle. I'd argue that Newcastle have had the easiest preseason fixture schedule versus all of the teams in the green zone. They played Brest, Girona, Yokohama, and Urawa Reds in their final 4 games, and that's important to note, right? Because their average goals scored per 90 is 2.3. That's the same as Liverpool and Man City, but their fixture run in comparison was much easier. So you can kind of see the relevance of the stat and the relevance of taking the fixture schedule into account. And this doesn't really put too much doubt in my mind about Newcastle, who, they're going to have Sandro Tonali available for selection in Game Week 3 when they play Spurs at St. James's Park. That game's going to be an absolute goal fest, and I'm sure Newcastle will perform well just at home because we know how good they are at home. Finally, it's Arsenal, 3 wins and 1 loss in the last 4. Their final preseason game was a 2-0 win versus Lyon, where Gabriel and Saliba both scored headers from Rice assists. It looks like the robust Arsenal defense from last season is back despite a challenging set of preseason fixtures. Arsenal definitely have impressed me, man. Like, really, really impressed me. Anywhere from 1 to 3, Arsenal looks fine because I doubt many people will go with 3 unless they're Arsenal fans just because of how expensive Arsenal players are in FPL this season. But yes, I love the Arsenal investment. I don't take too much out of, oh, there's only been 1 clean sheet. And all of their other players have returned a little bit later. That final preseason game against Lyon, Arteta did put out that final lineup, and the lineup I'd expect in Game Week 1. The only real doubt in that lineup was Trossard versus Martinelli for that left wing position, and maybe Havertz in the 8 versus Havertz in the 9, but it just shows you full strength Arsenal, they're not here to play games this season. And if you compared Arsenal and Newcastle's average goals conceded per game, both are at 0.8. And Arsenal had the tougher fixtures, less first team options who were available for games, and they still had the same defensive numbers as Newcastle, who are coming into this season a defense with a lot of FPL investment, right? And a defense that we all rate. So all in all, I just think Arsenal defense, they're not showing any signs of regression from last season. And what we can take out of this whole table is to perceive preseason cautiously. Don't go gung-ho, triple Arsenal, triple Brighton, and no City players. I mean, unless you really want to, but that's not what I'm putting out here. What I'm putting out here is that Villa preseason was poor, and therefore be cautious in how much Villa you own. We learned also about Liverpool's assets for Game Week 1 look very acceptable to have. I don't know, 2 to 3, but 3 might be a little bit too much because of the new coach, and you don't know exactly what you're getting yet. We also learned about City and Chelsea's attacks. Both of them are on the menu, but the defenses are avoidable early on. And yeah, that's the kind of stuff to take out of this, right? That's the way, that's the perspective to approach this information, not making your entire decisions around it, but allowing it to steer you away and towards certain directions. Let's move into the next section of the video where we're going to take a look at the premium tackers in preseason. So on this sheet, I've got all of the premium midfielders and forwards in FPL, and you can see how many minutes they've played in each preseason game. For all of the next sections, just keep in mind that the player sitting highest in the sheet is my most preferred option. The next player below him is the next most preferred option, and so on and so forth. I think you'll get the gist of this as we go along. We've also got the total minutes for each player that they played, as well as what percentage of game time they actually received, then goals, assists, GA. Now, let's start with Haaland. 5 goals in preseason, should have been 6 with a disallowed goal versus Barcelona, but there was no VAR in the stadium, which is annoying. But Haaland's minutes, they look fantastic, man. I mean, only they're just a little bit lower than Salah, who we know has a superb availability record. And based off the cheat sheet, we could say Haaland is currently the second best forward behind Mohamed Salah for predicted minutes coming into Game Week 1. Haaland is currently in for me, and I'll be posting my Game Week 1 team selection very soon, so subscribe if you want to have a look at that and see how I'm setting up for the start of FPL. But I've been on Haaland since game launch, and I haven't changed him once. Okay, actually, I did change him just to tinker around with the Salah no Haaland draft, but that was just tinkering. It's like, you guys get what I mean, right? Yeah, you guys get what I mean. But Haaland, he's been close to perfect in preseason. He's shown consistency. He's only blanked twice, and that's technically once in 5 games. And he's shown that explosivity, scoring a hat-trick versus Chelsea, who he plays this Sunday. 5 games, 5 goals, top 2 for preseason minutes out of all premium attackers. I mean, I've seen a couple people say he was shocking versus United. that definitely wasn't the case. But the thing with Haaland is if you don't play him with the players who can provide for him, help create chances for him, he won't get enough chances to score. And that City lineup was weak. Surprisingly weak, actually. And, that's an important point to note because when Rodri's not been in the team, Haaland usually doesn't score as well. So maybe keep that in mind for captaincy. All in all, though, Haaland was the top performing premium in preseason, and he's also my favorite premium in the game right now. Second spot is occupied by Mohamed Salah. We mentioned him before that he ranks first out of all the premiums for preseason availability. He's played the most minutes, man. Best percentage, but I won't be surprised to see Salah subbed this season because I looked into Slots' minutes rotations and he likes to utilize 60-30 with his attackers. Now, you'd assume, obviously, that Salah is the last attacker to come off the pitch for Liverpool. However, I do have some reservations with Salah. I was expecting more consistency from Mo in preseason, and he hasn't matched my expectations. I've also been speaking to a couple of Liverpool fans who have said that at some point Salah could lose penalties. That's very interesting to me because they've got some very good penalty takers in their team. Szoboszlai, McAllister, Trent can take him as well. He misses one usually every season. It's not like he scores them all, but I think Slots will trust Salah at the start, and if Salah misses, maybe Slot might go somewhere else for the pens, but we'll see. And if Salah has something in his contract with pens, then obviously it's not going to change, but I thought it was a relevant point to bring up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. Third is Alexander Isak, who got 2 goals and 1 assist in 3 preseason starts. Even though he's third for best minutes, they aren't all that great. But the most important game is always the last one in preseason, and that's the game we'll be able to take the most out of for predicted lineups and predicted minutes. The fact that Isak did get 89 minutes in that final game is great. And with Callum Wilson a big doubt for Game Week 1 and beyond, it just seems like a no-brainer pick. His FPL ownership is crazy high for a reason. Not much you need to say here, honestly. So let's move swiftly on to Bukayo Saka, who takes fourth spot over Heung-min Son. Saka played 45 minutes, then 75 minutes in Arsenal's final 2 preseason games, which points to a Game Week 1 start. He's the only premium for the late returners to really make himself available for Game Week 1, and I just love that, right? Every season, Saka's improved his game, and I think he will keep growing just upwards from here. I don't see any regression at the moment. So I think Saka, very, very, very good pick, and he's my favorite out of the 10 millions. Son is currently sitting in the 5th rank for premiums on my cheat sheet, and that's because he's been the only premium mint apart from Mo that's had a preseason. However, I don't think Sonny has looked particularly appealing. 3 goals in 5 starts, but the minutes are a big concern for me because they're not indicative of a player who's going to play close to 90 minutes every week, and that's exactly what Soccer is going to get, which is why Son's below him, right? Another point on Spurs and Son, I expect a lot less goal threat for Son this season with Solanke in the team because Solanke is an in-the-box 9. When Richarlison or Kulu, even in preseason, when they've been playing at striker for Spurs, they tend to come closer to the play, which gives Son space to run into. But with Dom there, I do think Son will get less chances on goal, less XG, which would mean what? The upside is elsewhere in that Spurs team. Let's touch on that upside later in the video. Now, we've discussed the premiums who actually did get minutes. Let's talk about the others who are potential doubts for Game Week 1, and that's Palmer, De Bruyne, Watkins, and Foden. If you ask me, how many of these players are going to start in Game Week 1? I would probably say Watkins. I would probably say Palmer. And I would probably say De Bruyne will start. We've already heard from Pep that Foden and Rodri are doubts for Game Week 1, so straight away I'd say Foden's not going to play, and therefore he's not an option in Game Week 1, because why are you going to waste that 9.5 million when you can have KDB for the same price? Yes, okay, KDB's got questionable minutes, but you could go for a Bruno, you could go for an Odegaard, you could even stretch to one of the 10 million premium mids. So I just don't really see any upside in going for Foden. Now, Palmer is a different story. He received 45 minutes in Chelsea's final preseason game against AC Milan, which was a 1-1 draw, and he created the chance for the goal with the free kick. He didn't directly get the assist, but in my mind, he really did make the goal. Look, I'm thinking about Palmer because he doesn't need to produce the same output from what he did last season. Just 80 to 85%, and the value is there. People aren't talking about this enough, man. They aren't. Palmer is what I like to call a hybrid mid. He can take points like Saka, but he can also hold explosively like Son and Salah, and his explosivity is very appealing to me. Look, our special focus here at Thinking Cap is captaincy, and it just wouldn't feel right to me not to mention how dangerous a Palmer captaincy is, and it can be in your pocket. Now, the real question is Palmer going to start game week 1? My prediction is yes, he will. Chelsea versus City is a Sunday kickoff, and I just think with a couple more days in training, there's only really a small chance he doesn't start. Just speaking to a couple friends who follow Chelsea, and they were saying there isn't really a more nailed player than Palmer for Chelsea. And just thinking about that and how good Palmer was last season, I think he will be in that game week 1 starting lineup to face Pep. I just think he will. De Bruyne, I think he'll start. Got only 1 minute, legitimately 1 minute in preseason, but he's back, and a couple days in training. I expect him to be ready for Sunday's game at the Bridge. Remember, he also does love a game against Chelsea. Oh, I almost forgot. Okay, let's talk about Watkins. 0 minutes in preseason. Radio silence from Villa. You're asking me, what does this mean for Watkins? Will he start in game week 1? And it's hard for me to give you a clear-cut answer. It really is hard. My opinion, Watkins starts game week 1. Emery showed his heavy reliance on Watkins last season, playing him most game weeks for 90 minutes. Even when Watkins was a doubt to start, Emery still played him. So I think we're going to see that at the start of the season, and I suspect they're just keeping it quiet on purpose. Maybe Emery's trying to play mind games with Lopetegui for that game week 1 West Ham fixture. I don't know. But I just do think Watkins is going under the radar as well a little bit. He is going under the radar, and he's not being talked about a lot, right? And that's because he's not really been active in preseason, but it is also depends. It does depend on the penalties because, as I've said many, many times throughout preseason, if you watch the channel, if you know the channel inside and out, if we knew he was on pens, he'd be the top 3 highest owned players in the game. But now we're moving on to the premium defenders. So what do you think about Watkins? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments section. First on the cheat sheet for premium defenders is actually a fake premium really, but it's Pedro Porro, who scored 2 goals for Spurs in preseason, 66.2% of the total available minutes, and he's looking super sharp. He scored a banger for Spurs in preseason. If you remember last season, Porro hit the woodwork 2 or 3 times in the first 10. He was very, very unlucky not to have at least 2-3 goals in the first opening kind of game weeks, and I think his luck is going to turn. And just watching him in preseason, he's looking super hungry at the moment, and I think Solanke's entrance will further elevate Porro because Porro's registered a handful of assists directly to Richarlison, so I think adding a striker who's very good in the air, likes to run in behind, and is great from cross scenarios, it kind of very much suits my Porro narrative, and I will be going with him in game week 1 for sure. Like, he's definitely locked for me. The downside with Porro is Spurs as a defense. Like, I don't rate Spurs as a defense, and they haven't fixed the set pieces and the crosses, the defending from those situations. In the Bayern game where they lost 3-2, Postecoglou's defense as a whole, they conceded 2 goals from those situations, so I think they will have perhaps 1 clean sheet in the first 5, but it's not as locked as everybody thinks. And I am a bit concerned about their defense, but Porro just got way too much attacking upside for me to ignore. Moving on to second place, it is Gabriel from Arsenal, and he's second because his minutes in preseason have actually been stronger than his counterpart Saliba, who has played almost every minute possible at the Euros. Gabriel also has better expected goal threat than Saliba, but I do expect both of them to start in game week 1 and offer plenty, and probably they will start all the way to game week 5. They did keep a clean sheet in their final preseason game, and I want to say there's not much in between the two of them, but it's just Gabriel's additional goal threat, which is why I prefer him to Saliba. Since we're on Arsenal, let's touch on Ben White. The only way I can potentially see you going for him is if you're planning to hold him past game week 12 and onwards, then perhaps he could be an option. I just think with how well the Arsenal center backs have done, I think in this case, you probably should save that 0.5 million and use it elsewhere. He's 5th on my cheat sheet because Trent Alexander-Arnold is 4th. Now, Trent has missed the most minutes in preseason. He's missed a lot of minutes in preseason because of the Euros, but I do expect him to start in game week 1. He did start against Sevilla, picked up 74 minutes and an assist. He's very tempting at 7 million, the cheapest he's been in 4 years, and if you're going against Haaland, I honestly think he's a must-have for your team because the upside at 7 million Trent offers with those starting fixtures is very, 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 very good. After Trent and White, it's Gvardiol in 6th place. I've already discussed City's defense. I don't rate it at all. I think it's quite poor. Gvardiol did get an assist in preseason. His minutes have been solid. So if you do like that City defensive investment, then Gvardiol is the guy to go and get. Just on Virgil van Dijk and Robertson. Robertson played in that second string team. I told you about that before, but I don't think he's going to start in game week 1. Honestly, I do think Tsimikas will be given the nudge just because of Robertson's availability throughout the summer. He was injured after the Euro. Sorry, Van Dijk. Look, I think Van Dijk's a great pick, man. He's going to be locked for Liverpool, no questions about it. How much he's actually going to offer from set pieces, how well will Slots' team do from set pieces, that is the question we want answers to. But Virgil van Dijk, he's going to play for Liverpool, no questions about it. Now, Trippier, I don't think he's going to start in game week 1, but game week 2 and onwards, he will play unless he gets sold, right? That's the doubt with Trippier, if he gets sold or not. But Lewis Hall and Livermento have been doing so well at fullback, which is why Trippier is super low for me in the premium defender section. I think there's less minutes for him there as a whole, and less minutes means less ability, less time to actually get those FPL points. So Trippier's a no-go for me. Calafiori, that guy's a backup center back for the Gabriel and Saliba. No chance I even touch him this season, I think at least. Moving swiftly on to the top forwards in preseason. Now we're on to the best performing players, starting with the forwards. I've put the top performing premiums in all of the top performer sheets just so you can reference the other forwards against premium numbers, which can help you visualize value basically. Players are also separated into price brackets. So for instance, with Chris Wood, he is my first place 6 million forward, and Armstrong is my first place 5.5 million forward. Let's actually start with Armstrong. So I've been a very strong advocate for Adam Armstrong in that 5.5 million bracket, but honestly, his minutes were a little bit lower than what I was personally expecting coming into preseason. Only 267 minutes total, but then again, he could be doing more work off the pitch. It's hard to really read into that. 3 goals in 5 games isn't bad for a 5.5 million, and you already know I like Southampton's chances this season. João Pedro is second for 2 reasons. One, he just came back from injury and he did score within 45 minutes, but I think he's going to average around 60 to 65 minutes most weeks this season. And 2, I don't particularly like his early fixtures, although the real value with Pedro is in game week 4 and 5. The real question is, will he make it there? But in terms of comparing these two, I prefer Armstrong because he's stronger in terms of expected minutes, and he's been playing for Southampton consistently through preseason, which is something I value very much. He's got a couple goals for the confidence. Ownership dangerously low for a 5.5 million forward on penalties, and with João Pedro in the template team currently, I do think that's the spot for me where I can gain down the line. Let's move on to Kai Havertz and Gabriel Jesus. Now, I don't think Jesus is going to be starting. I think Havertz is the starter, so let's just talk about Havertz for now. We can touch briefly on Jesus a little bit. Havertz, 234 minutes, 43.3% of Arsenal's total minutes, 2 goals and 2 assists for 4 returns. Very, very solid. I think he was the top Arsenal attacker in preseason most GA. The minutes a little bit weak, but he did play the Euros, came back early, and the minutes are decent. Like, it's not terrible. Jesus did get more, but he was available for more minutes, and you can see basically comparing the two. As Havertz's minutes go up, Jesus' minutes come down. With the right-hand side of that minutes column, that's the most latest game 6, right? So Havertz 76 minutes, Jesus 27. So you'd say that Havertz will probably start in game week 1. Now, my thing with Havertz is there's a danger that he might be playing a couple games at number 8 in that CM role, because Arteta seems to like to deploy him there, and I'm not sure about it. If I'm paying 8 million for a player this season, I need to know what I'm getting from them. That's the real thing with Havertz. And honestly, there's just a little bit of question marks in my mind because Jesus has been nice. Look, Jesus, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 returns. So they are tied basically for Arsenal GA, both up there. So will Arteta squeeze Jesus into the team, put Jesus as the 9, Havertz in the 8? We don't know what's going to happen, but I do think Havertz is a good option if you're looking for a differential forward, and I would be considering him. His minutes look very solid, but Jesus, on the other hand, definite no-go. Now we're going to take a look at the top mids in preseason. Let's do it. Next is the top performing midfielder cheat sheet, which involves the midfielders who had the highest GA and the best minutes percentage. Now, I have added a part for notable late returners because I do think all of the ones I've put there will start in Game Week 1 and are good options to consider. Bruno played 90 and got the assist for Garnacho's goal in the Community Shield. Garner only played 32 minutes in that match, but I'd argue he's the most nailed attacker for United in Game Week 1, apart from Fernandes, of course. Alongside them is Gordon, who scored for Newcastle at St. James's Park as well, and Bowen, Diaz. They both registered 2 GA in their only starts in preseason. 2 GA in their only starts. Could that be a sign for possible explosivity at the start of the season? Yes, it could, but I'd err on the side of caution with them as they're both at 7.5 million, and there's some very tasty options at that price and as well below. So I'd throw them into the watch list, but I highly doubt I'll own either of them for Game Week 1, and I don't think you should either too. Bruno and Garnacho are worth consideration, as I do think their minutes will be solid. They offer value at their price points, and the fixture schedule is good enough for our attack. Liverpool, Fulham, Southampton, and Brighton. Garnacho and Bruno have historically good return patterns in those fixtures, so I think it's a decent place to invest. Now let's move on to discuss the 5 million midfielders. So if you're looking for a cheap midfielder, you've got a Holland solid team, you're looking for a 5 million, you're wondering who's the best 5 million midfielder. My favorite is Morgan Rogers, and that's only because he's going to have the best minutes out of all of the other options. I think it's very unlikely Oscar Bob stays in the team after Game Week 2, and Diallo will be a 65 to 70 minute man because we've got wingers on the bench who can play there. We've got Sancho, we've got Anthony, Bruno can play there, Mount can play there too, so the competition is there for Diallo. And Ahmad also received the least minutes out of all 3 and has the worst minutes percentage at 50.6. Even then, I'm not sure I like any of these for Game Week 1 in terms of just the 5 million price point overall, but if I had to pick one, it's Rogers. Diaby's gone, and he seems to have earned himself a starting spot, at least for a while, so he's the one I would go for in the 5 million spot. Let's move on to the 6.5 to 7.5 million mids and the 5.5 million mids. So 6.5 to 7.5, the ones with the best minutes and GA in preseason, I've ranked Nkunku first. For me, out of all of the midfielders, and this is why I've ranked Nkunku first, okay? Because of the crazy minutes percentage, 98.4%. It's the best out of any Chelsea player in the entire squad, which is massive, by the way. The squad is way too big. But Nkunku, yes, he received the best minutes out of all of the Chelsea guys last season. Also scored 3 goals and assisted once for 4 goal contributions. I do believe he is nailed for Chelsea, and he's just such a good option because that squad has so much attacking talent. At 6.5 million, he's just way too cheap, and now that he's showing signs of strong return output, he's definitely number 1 on my list, and there's no question about that. Now, number 2 is Diogo Jota, and he's very interesting. He's 7.5 million, and he's the current favorite to lead Arne Slot's Liverpool as the number 9 in Game Week 1, and there is some serious value here. Promoted team in Game Week 1, Ipswich away, for one of the best attacks last season and in preseason. I like the Jota pick, I do. Since he's been back, his minutes have been good, 45, 65, 90, but I will say that I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple game weeks you pick him in your Game Week 1 team, and in a couple game weeks he gets hooked off at 55 minutes and doesn't play for the next 10 weeks. So there is risk, and it's just dependent where you are on your risk appetite, if you want to play it safe or if you want to play it risky. Again, my team selection video will be out soon, so if you want to see where my risk appetite is and how I manage my risk appetite in my player selection, then make sure to go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video. But swiftly moving on to Mbeumo, 5 out of 5 starts, 79.6% of Brentford's total minutes, which is the best for any Brentford player, and 3 goals, 1 assist. He looks pretty hot in preseason, but unless Tony leaves in the next 2 days, I can't consider Brian Mbeumo because I need the penalties added into Mbeumo as an asset for me to be able to pick him, because he's competing with Eberichi Eze at 7 million, who we're probably 90% certain is Palace's penalty taker, and without that, I'm just not sure Mbeumo is for me, but his form was good in preseason, and Brentford, they're going to score goals, so perhaps he might be one for you. Third is Kulusevski, who's been playing number 9 for Tottenham this season. We saw with Richarlison last season what kind of value that could offer, but Dom Solanke, I predicting to start in Game Week 1 because it's the Monday kickoff, and Ange's track record suggests that he's not afraid to throw a new signing into the deep end. I do think Kulusevski will start either on the right wing or at the number 10 position for Maddison, which some of my friends have said would be a shock to see Maddo benched, but he's just been so poor in preseason. He has. Kulusevski looks to be firing, and I think Ange will get him into the 11 for Leicester. His minutes throughout preseason, they've been super strong. 45, 41, 63, 75. 3 starts in the most recent ones suggest, hey mate, you're starting for Game Week 1. And look, Ange isn't stupid. He's not going to drop Tottenham's top attacker in terms of output. 3 goals and 1 assist in 5 games. He's not going to drop him. No chance. Next, Marcus Rashford. Now, Rashford last season, everyone had him in Game Week 1 and I didn't. I only had Bruno, who I sold off for his 12-pointer against, I believe it was Nottingham Forest in Game Week 3 or something. But the point is, my gut feeling told me that Rashi wasn't in the form he needs to be for FPL, and he had a shocking season last year. Not to my surprise. I think he's looking a bit sharper than last season, but honestly, I'm a United fan. I try to be as level-headed as I can as a fan, and I'll tell you that for 7 million, I would definitely be going away from Rashford early on. Like, don't even consider him, because look, the trigger with Rashford, for if you want to know when Rashford is going to be hot, there's one thing that you can, when you watch him, you see it in his game, and that's when he's not missing easy chances. He buries every single easy chance he gets, and that is the key to Rashford, right? That's how you know when he's hot. So you can add him to your watch list for sure, but stay away from him Game Week 1. I think there's potential he could miss a game in that first 5 just because Ahmad and Garnacho are competing for those spots. Hoyland's going to be coming back. Xerxes in the flow. So if Rashi doesn't start performing, Ten Hag will eventually have to drop him. No more favorites, Ten Hag. No more. But look, Rashi, 3 GA in preseason, not bad, but 5 played as well. But the minutes suggest, they do suggest a Game Week 1 start, but just depends on Xerxes. Because if he's fit, then there is more of a doubt whether Rashford starts or not. But honestly, look, if I had to predict the United front 3, it's Garner on the left, Rashford up front, Ahmad on the right, and Bruno in the number 10 spot. Now let's discuss the 5.5 million midfielders. My current favorite is Emile Smith-Rowe. He just signed for Fulham from Arsenal, and I do rate Smith-Rowe as a player. He's very creative, likes to play simple, one-touch, two-touch football. He's scored 2 in 2 for Fulham and is playing in an advanced 10 role, with Andreas Pereira being pushed back to a CM role. This is similar to what Havertz sometimes plays for Arsenal in that 8 hybrid role, and I think, look, Smith-Rowe, he's a starter for Fulham, definitely. They haven't spent all this money on him for him to be sitting on the bench, that's for sure. My second preference is young Kuba Minte from Brighton, a summer signing, and he's shown why there's hype around him at the moment. 5 returns in 4 games, that's the same amount as Haaland with 1 less game played. And look, I see the hype around him. I've watched him. He looks explosive. He looks like a good player. And 67.2% of the total Brighton minutes, 78 minutes in the final game. That's indicative of a start for Mr. Minte. So, look, I like Minte for Game Week 1, but it's just the fixtures as a package. And I do think that, look, you're basically going for Brighton players because of that Game Weeks 4 and 5. City have tough games, Arsenal have tough games, Spurs have tough games, and Brighton have 2 really nice games. And you want that Brighton asset, right? But is Minte going to make it there? You'd probably say, yeah, probably right now. But would you be surprised if Adingra wins that spot back on the right-hand side? No. You wouldn't be surprised at all. So I would err on the side of caution with Minte, but look, he's a very, very good pick. based off form alone, definitely get him in. That's one of the unique cases where I think, look, form, I think you can go straight off form because he has been so hot. Especially as a new player coming into the Prem, I think he will do decent. The next one might surprise you, might not, but it's Jacob Murphy from Newcastle. Actually registered the most goal involvements out of any player in preseason. 5 goals and 3 assists. That's 8 attacking returns, which is crazy. That's crazy. That's more than Haaland. He's been deputizing on the right wing and has been in some serious form, man. Like, what's holding me back from Murphy? You know, sometimes I ask myself, what's holding me back from Murphy? And I ask within, and what it says is, it's just the midterm minutes. Like the medium term in terms of like how many game weeks, the medium term minutes, because I wouldn't be surprised if Barnes gets a couple starts on that right wing, or if Newcastle make a late signing for a new right wing. I do think that might happen. So if one of those two things happen, then you're stuck with a Newcastle spot wasted, and you're stuck with a midfielder who's not even playing, where other guys are going to have Elanga, Smith Rowe, Minte even in that spot, who have more minutes guaranteed, and they went for that minutes guarantee. Now they're benefiting because Murphy's out of the team. But look, it's a what if, but you've got to think this long ahead, because that's really important, because you need to go with picks here who are going to play. People and players, they're not going to get points if they're not on the pitch, and that's the thing I always come back to. My last 2 players on this list are Kamada from Palace, who's been very good in preseason, and Callum Hudson-Odoi, who's started preseason quite well, but he actually was benched in Forest's last preseason game. Now, look, I don't think this is very relevant because Elanga was also benched for that game, so I do think those 2 guys are the starting attackers for Nottingham Forest. For Game Week 1, I wouldn't be worrying about Callum Hudson-Odoi's minutes. He's looked good in preseason, but for me, I I think Emil Smith Rowe, he just offers a little bit more for me, and I kind of like that investment. Kamada, very interesting, because if Eze does get injured at some point, Kamada could be on penalties at 5.5 million, which is very solid. He was Glasner's penalty taker at his former club. I don't think he will be here, because I think that's going to be Eze, but just watch out for that, because if he is penalty taker, he was decent in preseason, a couple returns here, minutes very solid, among the top 4 for total Crystal Palace percentage minutes. So very solid pick, and I think you should consider him. It's just in terms of fixtures, I'm not really sure I fully like that Crystal Palace patch, except for Eze and Mateta if he is fit. Now, the top performing defenders in preseason. Now, into the top performing defenders in preseason, we've got Paro up there. You already know he's the fake premium, but very relevant premium. So, Robinson from Fulham at 4.5 million is the top defender for me. 2 assists and 2 clean sheets for 4 returns total is very impressive from Anthony Robinson. With Fulham having those great fixtures, game weeks 2 and 3, I think he's a very solid investment. 77% of Fulham's minutes, 208 minutes played, which honestly, compared to some of the other guys on this list, isn't that strong, but Fulham didn't have a lot of preseason games in total, so it's expected that his minutes are lower than what the others are. But I will say this, Fulham have been playing quite a lot of games behind closed doors, and something Fantasy Football Scout was saying is that Fulham have been very secretive with how they've been doing their preseason this season, and I wonder how that's going to affect them coming into Game Week 1. Like, is it going to benefit them? Is it going to hopper them? Or it doesn't really make a difference? I guess we'll see. But I think it's an interesting approach, the way they're doing it. Perhaps it's tactical. They want to try a couple things out. I don't know. But yes, Robinson first for me. Then it's Dan Burn from Newcastle. And let's actually talk about Dan Burn versus kind of like Lewis Hall and Livermento. So Livermento's bottom for me because he's competing with Trippier. And that's the real issue there. Like, he's not going to be able to win out against Trippier, and even if he does, Trippier is going to get a couple minutes. Now, if Trippier leaves, Livermento, you'll see him right at the top of this list. Okay? But Trippier, as of right now, this moment, he hasn't left the club, so Livermento is the bottom guy for me. Burn versus Hall, this is very interesting, Loud. Look, I'm a big Hall fan because he's been so hot in preseason. 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 clean sheets, 5 returns total for a defender. He's had very strong minutes for Newcastle, stronger than Burn, 69.3%, 374 minutes in preseason, 90 minutes last game. I do think he's going to be starting at left back for Newcastle in Game Week 1, but I just don't know long term what it's going to mean for him, like what happens when Botman's back. And for me, I'm looking at Hull, and I want him from game weeks 1 to 5. I'm just hoping and I'm thinking, will he get all the starts there? I'm not quite sure. Burn will, on the other hand. So if you do think Newcastle have a couple clean sheets in their opening run, then Burn's the guy to get for me. He's just so nailed. But like, that's the thing with risk appetite you need to think about, because if you're picking a Burn, then it allows you in another spot to pick someone with a little bit more minutes risk but maybe a little bit more upside, right? So that's how you balance it. Whereas let's say I had a midfielder pick and I picked Hole in the defense, I would go for a nailed 5.5 because I've already got that risk appetite there with Hole. Like, that's the upside. Does that make sense? Like, that position there is the upside, and then I've got my midfielder with a safety, or the other way around. So Burn and Hole kind of offer that, and then you've got Van Heck. Now, I would like to have put Dunk and Baco on this list, but look, they weren't in the top performers in preseason. Van Heck was. 1 goal, 2 clean sheets, very, very solid minutes, 70.6% of Brighton's minute, and that's up there for them in terms of their total squad. So I like Van Heck as an option, and look, perhaps I think Dunk will he be highly owned? I think he'll be somewhat decently owned, Dunk. So, Van Heck does offer that other route there. You can go for the lower owned player just for extra points, and hopefully you'll gain more rank if Van Heck does well against the Dunk, but Dunk's got better goal threat, better expected goal threat. He had it last season, and we know how, and I discussed earlier, how good Fabian Hurtzeller teams are from set pieces, so I am thinking about a Brighton defender. It's probably going to be one of the center backs, and I think I am at this moment just leaning towards Dunk. But Van Heck does offer a good route for that 4.5 million price point, and he did score a goal in preseason, right? So if you want to go there, that's a potential option. I think he's quite solid. Sugawara is next. 1 goal, 1 assist, and 2 clean sheets for 4 total returns for a defender. 340 total minutes, 63% selected, and look, it's just very solid. He did get 90 minutes in his last game for Southampton, so he probably is going to start, and he has a lot of attacking upside. I did watch a couple games of him throughout preseason, so he is a solid player, one to watch for sure, to keep your eye on. He offers some pretty good value. Next, 4 million, Harwood Bellis, man. This guy is, I like him. I like him. And I like Southampton. So if you don't want to go Sugawara, you want to go just to save the money, get anybody else in, Harwood Bellis is my number one pick out of all of these guys for the 4 millions. 4 million price point. I think his minutes are solid. Did score a goal in preseason, 2 clean sheets. Lost 4 games in preseason, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 80 minutes, and then 90 minutes. Very, very good availability record that he's boasting, and he should be a solid option in that 4 million price point. They've just splashed some cash on buying him, so I think he's very good. Now we've also got Ben Johnson, I believe, from Ipswich at 4 million. He played every single game for Ipswich and was ranked first, the best Ipswich player in terms of the percentage of minutes, which was 84.7%, 305 total minutes, 2 clean sheets he picked up in preseason. Very, very solid for Ben Johnson, 4 million. Personally, I am putting Harwood Bellis over Johnson just because I expect Southampton to pick up at least hopefully 1 clean sheet in the first 5, but I don't think Ipswich are going to pick up a clean sheet in the first 5. They could surprise, but I just think Southampton are the team I'm backing, and that's why I'm just putting Harwood Bellis that much higher. But Johnson, he's a great option, and he's actually the attacking fullback, the right side. So we got Leif Davis on the other side. You got Johnson. So you're getting that Ipswich fullback for 4 million. It's very, very enticing, and I understand why he's a very, very high owned 4 million defender in this game at the moment. This is why, because he's got the minutes, right back for Ipswich Town, and the left back Leif Davis offered a lot. And you know who's playing on Johnson's side? It's Amari Hutchinson. In the last Ipswich preseason game, Amari Hutchinson actually played on the right wing, which is very interesting. So what does that mean for Leif Davis as a pick? What does that mean for Johnson as a pick? We'll have to see when we get there, but it's just all food for thought, basically. Now, next we've got Tyreek Mitchell at 5 million. He got 360 minutes, 80% of Palace's minutes played is very solid. That's second best out of all of the defenders on this list in terms of minutes percentage. 360, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 returns in this preseason patch, and look, his minutes are very solid. The thing is, you know what you're getting with Mitchell, but last season Mitchell came out in an interview and he said, look, I want more GA, I want to get myself in the England team, you know what I mean? And he did. I remember I owned him for a crazy 15-pointer in a really bad week. I think it was game week 11, game week 12. And Mitchell, I'm surprised by this kind of Mitchell in preseason. Goal and an assist in the first 5 game weeks. Usually Mitchell, his returns are quite spread out. So seeing two so close together is, it's kind of like, ooh, it does give me that ooh feeling. So I think about him as an option, but realistically, we all know Munoz at the same price for Palace. He has a lot more goal threat, and historically, he's returned better than Tyreek Mitchell. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Personally, if I had to pick one of Mitchell and Munoz, I would pick currently Munoz, but Mitchell is there too if you want that differential. And that's a wrap on my preseason cheat sheet. If you took absolutely any insight out of this video at all, I'd really appreciate a like, and make sure you subscribe because I've got my Game Week 1 team selection coming and one more video which I'm very excited about that's coming after that. And all of them are coming before the start of Game Week 1, so hit that sub button, activate your thinking cap, and if you want to know the best times to wildcard, check out this video. Peace.